Okay, so thank you very much for having me. It's really an honor to be in such august company, sandwiched between two professors. I'm merely an assistant professor. I would say, just at the beginning of my academic career, and I very much appreciate being invited to present to you. I am from Toronto, but I live in Amsterdam. I've lived here for many years. I haven't been in Toronto for a while for obvious reasons. I look forward to going back to Toronto. And so this is kind of a way for me to be connected to Toronto, which I also appreciate. I will give you this talk today with the title that I actually developed with the help of Margaret, so as to be able to present research that I was working on last time I was in Toronto in this context, the context of the roots of violence. So I will, in the process of the talk, I will say a little bit about my own background and my research, but maybe I'll just jump right into the subject matter. The alt-right, what is it, or perhaps more accurately, what was it? Because I would say that it is something that may have passed, and certainly the research that I'm presenting here is research that's focused on a few years ago, so the recent past. The alt-right isn't as with many such kind of movements. It's a bit difficult to exactly define, and in any case, the definition would perhaps change at certain points and in different contexts. But roughly, we can say that it emerged with Trump in 2015, and it culminated in the violent riots in Charlottesville in fact, 2017, that should be. And these were actually covered by a journalist working for the media organization, Canadian media organization, The Rebel, which I will be talking to you about shortly. The alt part in the name alt-right refers to their alternative perspective in relation to establishment conservatism. Hence, they were Trumpist, as Trump was himself an alternative to establishment conservatism in the US. They're also characterized by their anti-immigrant stance, xenophobic, and in many instances, you could say racist, open to whites, and a kind of a willingness or a lack of squeamishness to stand alongside white supremacists. The picture that you see to the right is from a young man who was participating in the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally in 2017, who I have, by the way, a dog that I have to take care of as I'm the only person at home today, one of the joys of working from home. And so if I have to get his attention with a little bone, you'll forgive me. Yoki, I have a bone here for you. Comic relief, you can think of it like that. So the alt-right was also led by micro celebrities, alt-right micro celebrities, a term that refers to social media, who had a facility with transgressive, humorous styles from internet subculture. So here I get to the kind of area that I specifically focus on with my research. What you see on the right side of the screen is a graphic representation of a kind of a heuristic that I use to conceptualize the internet as a kind of a whole. And my research is focused on what you could say is the bottom of the web. And I've been looking for the past, basically since Trump got elected, at how ideas and what are referred to as memes move from the fringe, the bottom of the web, to the mainstream. And when we talk about the bottom of the web, what the focus of my research has been on in large part on a so-called image board called 4chan, which has been referred to as the kind of subcultural source of the alt-right. It is the place where a lot of cult-like icons come from. You may have heard of the famous Pepe the Frog, also a lot of antagonistic slang expressions, a term that became dramatically mainstreamed in the 2015 election with cuckservative, and also bizarre theories like QAnon. And this subculture has also been repeatedly connected with real world acts of violence. So in Toronto, there was in 2018, there was the North York van attack by a young man who, prior to killing, I think it was 10 people, logged onto 4chan and reported for duty, announcing his act of violence. So the spread of these memes from the fringe of 4chan into the right-wing mainstream in 2015, 2017 to 2017 was facilitated very much by Trump and his use of social media, but also by a network of new media anchored by Breitbart in the US and by something called the Rebel in Canada, which I will be talking about today. First, a few words about Trump's notorious social media use. So he rose to power through his social media use, which included frequent allusions to conspiracism. Right from the beginning of his campaign, he was a proponent of the birther conspiracy theory right up until the end, which we will hear about later on today with the Capitol riots and the QAnon conspiracy theory. And he seemed to pick up many of these ideas from fringe subcultures. One example of this is a tweet that he sent out in 2015 of himself as Pepe the Frog, Pepe the Frog being an icon that is used in this 4chan subcultural or subterranean part of the internet that I've been studying. Trump's slogan-like rhetoric and social media use often function as kind of what are called in political theory, dog whistles. And that means that these are terms that are like attuned to that they kind of tune into niche far-right communities that mean something special to these communities. And those communities would include white nationalists, many of whom congregated on 4chan beginning in around 2015. This particular part, this subterranean part of the internet, was not always necessarily a white supremacist cesspool, but it was always kind of a cesspool in another sense. Trump's reactionary populist political style was particularly facilitated by a shouty, sensationalistic, far-right group of pundits who you could find on sites like Breitbart and the Rebel. So let's say a few words about Breitbart before we go on to talk about the Rebel, because Breitbart was the most famous example of this new right-wing media that helped Trump into office. And it's been said that it was fundamental to setting the antagonistic tone of the 2015 election, and also its anti-immigrant agenda. On the right of the screen here, you see an article that was published on Breitbart where they explained the alt-right to mainstream conservatives. And I'll talk about that on the next slide as well. So the Breitbart described itself as a nakedly partisan media outlet for Trump, which is not that unusual in Europe. There's lots of partisan media sources. It's a little less common in North America. But Breitbart was also widely considered as a platform for the alt-right. This term was used by the chief editor-in-chief at the time, Steve Bannon, who gave a famous talk at the Roy Thompson Hall some years ago. Also, this term was used by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it was also used by one of the main figureheads of the alt-right, Richard Spencer. So there was kind of a wide general agreement of Breitbart's role in relation to the alt-right movement. That article, the screenshot of which I put onto the screen in the last slide, there was a very nice, interesting expose by Joseph Bernstein from BuzzFeed, in which he kind of showed how the sausage was made and how actually this article like laundered very far right viewpoints, even neo-Nazi agendas to a kind of a mainstream audience. And I think this quote is worth reading here. Breitbart was a brilliant audience expansion machine financed by billionaires, specifically the Mercers, designed to draw in people disgusted by some combination of identity politics, anti-immigration, and if that meant involving neo-Nazis, that was okay. So then I would position The Rebel as the Canadian Breitbart. Breitbart had a very successful website. It had a somewhat successful Facebook page. It did not have very much of a YouTube presence. In this period, the most successful alt-right YouTube channel for the rise of Trump, and so we're speaking about American politics, was in fact a Canadian media outlet, The Rebel. This was founded by a former Reform Party operative and oil and tobacco lobbyist by the name of Ezra Levant after the failure of the Sun News Network, for which he was the anchor. And while The Rebel covered Canadian news, their most engaged with content was, we found in our study, which used quantitative methods as well, were what you could call new right culture war issues. So when we took all of the transcripts and then we looked at what you call bigrams, two words occurring together, the top two words occurring together were the words white people, and the top three words occurring together were the words freedom of speech. And I'll get into that a little bit in the course of the presentation if time permits. So we did a distant reading of The Rebel's content, and we found a lot of alt-right slang on The Rebel, especially in viewers' comments, but also in video transcripts. So here you see that far-right slurs popular on 4chan have proliferated within social media sites, particularly within the relatively unmoderated comments section. On the right of the screen is a visualization of one of those slurs that did well in Breitbart, that was exceptionally popular in 4chan, and we found the same kind of pattern in The Rebel as well. This kind of language, this alt-right slang, is paradoxical, and this is where this phrase rhetorical violence comes in. In one sense, it's not meant to be taken at face value. So in that sense, it's rhetorical, like a rhetorical question. In another sense, it has a normalizing function that desensitizes speakers to real violence. So the language then does some kind of work of you could say that it does some kind of violence, and at least it normalizes a worldview that is a violent worldview. And so the spread of this kind of jokey alt-right language, I believe I would say was the alt-right's greatest accomplishment, even if the alt-right is a bit of a thing of the past. And what is interesting is that this can be measured with digital methods. So I have a lab in Amsterdam. We do a lot of this kind of stuff. You can visit the website for the lab. There are many reports and papers that have been written using these kinds of techniques to look at the movement from the fringe to the mainstream of these kinds of things, including QAnon and others. So what I want to focus on here then is YouTube. YouTube has been discussed as a radicalization machine. There was a famous New York front page cover story about this, and it was a very interesting story in which featured one of the figures of The Rebel as being one of the people who pulled a young man into this violent worldview. But the theory in this kind of the writing that has been done on this story and many others, is that something about the design of YouTube and its recommendations, where it recommends you other videos, is what is central to this radicalization process. But my proposal is that it's also very much the celebrities, the celebrity pundits, and also their interactions with the audience that are very important. So YouTube is a platform where people can have it. Long before Zoom, there were people broadcasting from their bedrooms, broadcasting their opinions from their bedrooms, and developing these parasocial, one-sided relationships with their audience. For example, PewDiePie, who has 120 million subscribers. That's many more than Trump had with his Twitter account. And there's also an enormous explosion of political punditry. This is a website where you can explore all of the political channels on YouTube. This is current, a live website. So this is not like what I've been showing you, which is slightly historical research. And you can see there's a long tail that goes into very specific niche political viewpoints. In 2017, we made a map of YouTube. And what we discovered back in 2017, YouTube has changed since then, is that there was what one YouTube employee admitted subsequently, an alt-right vertical, which is to say a whole kind of integrated ecosystem of alt-right channels that were that were adjacent to a lot of the rest of the YouTube. So on the right of this screen, on the right of this image, you see a lot of this alt-right stuff. On the left, you see kind of larger YouTube, including people unboxing toys. And then in the middle is that figure, PewDiePie. So it didn't take many clicks to get to the alt-right. This graph was made through who subscribes to who. I can get into that if you ask me about it later. Okay, so now to speak specifically and rapidly about the Rebel. What we did is we looked at the most engaged with videos on the entire of the Rebel's site, and we found that the top most engaged videos, which is to say the ones that had the most comments on them from the audience, were from these four pundits. And just a quick note, it's interesting that videos on YouTube have a great many comments on them, most of which, as you can see on the far right of the screen, are actually invisible. You can't see them, they're hidden from view, but you can with the API. That's like the technical side that they allow programmers to access. You can actually extract those comments and then you can see what people have been saying. And the comment section, as people in new media have observed already for some years, is a place that affords a bad kind of speech. It's full of what you call flame wars, antagonism, and also they're preoccupied with speaking about their rights, in specific, the freedom of speech. So these are those four figures. They were all on the Rebel. Lauren Southern, Gavin McGuinness, the founder of the Proud Boys, now deemed a terrorist organization by the Canadian government. Tommy Robinson, a UK counter-jihadist and the founder of the English Defence Force, and Faith Goldie, who came in third place for the mayor of Toronto after she came out as a neo-Nazi. The top commented video was from Lauren Southern, and it was a video where she filmed a protest against Jordan Peterson's opposition to Bill C-72, which prohibits Kathleen Wynne's a bill prohibiting discrimination on the basis of gender. So Southern staged in this video a counter protest. You can watch it on YouTube, where she mocked the overreach of political correctness. And I would sort of say that this positions her as a kind of field commander in a new culture war. And this is a culture war that's in some sense continuation of the 90s culture war in the Bill Clinton era. But what's new here is this kind of transgressive style, I would suggest, and a constant conversation with the audience. Here's a few quotes from Lauren Southern's book that she wrote. It's a generational grievance against baby boomers, where she speaks of the feeling of dispossession that she feels towards the greatness of Western culture. And also she speaks about how she's opposed to the whole ideal of diversity, and how she's been taught her whole life that everything bad is equivalent to Hitler. So you can't say anything negative because you basically are accused of being Hitler. I call this type of ideology burlesque traditionalism. What I mean by that is traditionalism is defined here as an extreme form of what another ideology called paleoconservatism, which is a very reactionary ideology that believes in a kind of past divine golden age that it wants to reinstate against the modern world. There is a particular political philosopher who I would position as the main figure there. It was also Steve Bannon's favorite philosopher, and burlesque in the sense that it's a transgressive treatment of a serious subject, in this case, caricaturing political correctness. So I think I'm probably running out of time, which is okay because I only have a couple more slides. The paradox of ironic intolerance, how the alt-right co-opted free speech. So in 2015 to 2017, it was possible to say almost anything on social media platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. While they claimed libertarian principles, we now understand that the platforms themselves did understand what was going on, this problem. As I say, a YouTube employee knew about the alt-right vertical at the time, but they chose to overlook it. It also made them money. You could say the same thing perhaps about other famous instances of this. In this period, there was the alt-right's, rhetorical violence was adopted by pretty much mainstream YouTube micro-celebrities to generate controversy. So PewDiePie, for example, in 2017 had a famous incident where he made an anti-Semitic joke. Anti-political correct jokes were seen as kind of principled libertarian protest by people like Lauren Southern. They weren't seen as the kind of explicit statements of hatred that we might hear them as. So there's a kind of a specific context within which these were seen as okay, a context that was all about being transgressive and saying what you weren't supposed to say. So this is my second last slide. I found this image on the right side of the screen here on 4chan poll. This is a Lauren Southern fan art poster, which features a lot of popular alt-right slang, terms like red-pilled and this strange 3 brackets, which I've written a paper about in a journal called New Media and Society. And these and many other such antagonistic expressions often appeared in the rebel pundits' own videos. They used these terms, red-pilled in particular, but they occurred a great deal in the audience's comments. And so there's a kind of a connection between these subcultures, or between the subculture of 4chan poll, which is a very extreme, and I would say essentially even neo-fascist subculture, and the kind of comment section of social media with the micro-celebrity sort of speaking to this audience and speaking with this language. So while many in the alt-right claim to use this slang in a kind of a relatively harmless, rebellious way, being transgressive, the language also constituted an intolerant worldview that was acted on with extreme violence, such as in the case of the North York van attacker and many, many other cases. As these kinds of instances of violence accumulated, in particular from late 2017 onwards, most of these alt-right micro-celebrities and rebel pundits backed away from the movement and also eventually left the rebel as well. So this is my last slide. In 2015, to 2017, which is when the period that I focused on in this research, the rebel helped mainstream the fringe. Since then, the alt-right movement has fragmented, the rebel lost its momentum, and its popular pundits were deplatformed, as has been Trump. As a byproduct, this has also fueled the rise of new alt-tech platforms, including Parler, which it is interesting to note, the controlling interest in that business is Rebecca Mercer, who also was the funder of Breitbart. The alt-right's rhetorical violence depends on bottom-up, this is my conclusion, depends on bottom-up subcultural dynamics, which can be traced through looking at these specific queries, these specific slang queries, but it also involves top-down actors. That's very important. Politicians, pundits, and media entrepreneurs who fan these flames. So in my opinion, this is not ultimately solvable through technical fixes. But what we can do is we can use digital methods techniques to better understand these dynamics and ultimately to hold these parties accountable for their actions. That is my presentation. And I close off with this image from that points you to the website where much of my research, the research of my lab, can be found. Now I'm going to stop the share.